Okay, let me start with React. React is nothing but a UI library which helps us build user interfaces with interactive user interfaces, and was built at Facebook. This is going to be more on getting started with React, wherein we can start building our own applications, small applications, and more about the theory part of it can be taken. We can read on the official website. Jumping directly into what React is, I'll just open my IDE and start directly with that. So I'll start with building a small Hello World application and then take you through what exactly that is and how it has been done. So for that to work, for React to work, we need the React library and the React DOM library. And I'm using something that is known as Babel core, which will do the transpilation for React onto the browser. If we were to do it via npm, we could have used it on a command line, and that would transpile and emit out JavaScript code, which the browser can directly understand. So these are the three scripts that I'm going to use so that I can directly run code on browser rather than going through the npm cycle. Okay, so React has the philosophy of having smaller components and using them and rendering them. And each component has a render method which should emit out DOM elements. So if you can look at this method here, so this is the syntax for creating a component, react.create class, which has a render method inside it, which returns a DOM element. I'll talk about this in a bit, so let's not worry about this for now, and let me run this particular piece of code. Okay, so what this will do is with this, so this has created a React component named hello, and then we render that. So React DOM takes care of rendering the component that we pass it to it, and then the element that we pass. So this is a DOM element where it needs to render whatever we are passing it. So here, if you see that I have a container div with ID container, and I'm passing that div to the React DOM in render method, and I pass the hello component to the method. Let's quickly look at it and how it is rendered. So if you look at it, we have a hello into hello rendered here. Now what I'm going to do is, this is not of much use to us because we don't have any dynamic content here. What I'll do is I'll pass in something to it which can be changed dynamically wherever we use. So I'm going to create a prop with some name, and I'm going to access that here. Name, and so what will happen here is whatever you pass to the component, those are known as properties, and React internally into the component can access them via this .props whatever name we have. And so if we just run this code, we can see that we have it rendered. So React has React components are stateful, like they can maintain its own state and render them. So this was something that was passed by the outer world, but we can as well start maintaining our own state inside the component, and it can be changed on the fly. So let's create another component which will illustrate that part of statefulness. Okay, so I'll create a counter. So let's create a React component. Okay, so the motive that I want to achieve here is I'll have a button, and on clicking that button, what I want to do is increase the counter of whatever it was earlier. So for that, what we need is we'll need a div. So I'll create a div for it. Okay, so one more thing that I would like to tell is the return method of the render should always return a single root node. So if I were to have a button, and so if I were to do something like this, this wouldn't be a valid return from a render method. So we should encapsulate all of that into a div, like into a single node element, and then return it from the render method. So let's create a button which I want to use to click increment the counter. So let's call it click me, and then I need a div wherein the counter can be updated. So let's create a p tag. Tag the count is okay. So I'll just have a placeholder here, and let's look at the render of this. So now here, which returns the div which has all this. Let's render this. I'll quickly copy this and do this. And I'll get rid of this hello component. Now let's render this. So we can see that we have the placeholder for all of this. Let me increase the font size. Yeah, I think this is good enough. Okay, so now I want this to be a placeholder, right? So what I'll do is something from the state dot count. So this will give me the count. Now, so React, okay, so there are a couple of lifecycle methods here which we can use. So since, as I mentioned, React maintains its own state, it can initialize itself. So what I can say, what I can do is have get initial state, and that will set the state before rendering anything. So let me say that I'll set the state to state of count to 0, and so what this should do is the count will be now 0, which will be got from the state here, and I've set it here in the initial method. Let's look if it's working. Yes, it is. Okay, so now what I want to do is on clicking of this, I should be going and changing the state here of the count to increment it by 1. So let's create a callback and pass it to the on-click handler of the button. So I'll call the method as increment count, and that will do nothing but this dot set state, and what it will do is this. I'll just update the count to this dot state dot count plus 1. Okay, so what happens here is when I call this method increment count, it will set the new state, but before what it will do is it will get the current count, increment it by 1, and set the new count into this. And React, what it does is whenever the state is changed of a component, it will go ahead and re-render the entire component.
Just join. They wanted a recap because they couldn't join the Hangout link earlier.
Okay.
Give a quick recap.
Okay.
So just requested for a recap.
Okay, cool. I'll do a recap. Okay, I'll do the recap in a bit. I'll just finish this component wherein the increment counter can be done. So let me quickly go ahead and add the on-click handler, and this would be this dot increment count. And so whenever someone clicks on this, it will call this method. It will set the state of count to count plus 1. We had initially set the count to 0, and let's try running this. And voila, we have the counter here. And for those people who wanted a recap, I'll just quickly give a recap of what I'm doing here. So I have this React library included into my index page, where React is the core and React DOM is used for the browser rendering. Earlier, both of these used to be a single library, and since they have launched the React Native, they've thought of using the React core library there, and launching the React DOM out of it and making it independently usable. And this library here, Babel core, is used to transpile the React code to the JavaScript, which the browser can understand. Because if you look at this, this syntax is known as JSX. These are the this is given by, this is an XML syntax, XML kind of syntax, which React has named it, that JSX thingy. So the browser cannot understand JSX natively, and that's why we are using this particular library Babel code for transpiling the React component, JSX components to JavaScript. If we don't want to do this, what we can do is we can use the JavaScript syntax of the React, and then we don't have to go with this particular transpiler. We can write JavaScript classes, like we can say React dot create, and that will create a DOM element directly rather than all of this. I'll not go into that. I'll just go with this JSX syntax. So the next thing that we did was created a hello component, which takes in a property name and simply prints it. Okay, so I'll quickly render that method again with a property name, and I think this should render the name here. Let's do here. Yes. So what it does is this property named name was passed on to the component in the this dot props, and the name was extracted out of it. So the next thing that we did was created a counter component wherein we, on clicking the button, we increment the counter. So basically, like I mentioned, React can maintain its own state and it can deal with it without doing any DOM manipulation. Like, we don't have to do any DOM manipulation. React itself on state change will go ahead and re-render the DOM using the diffing algorithm, which is known as the virtual DOM, and it is efficient. For more details, we can go and look at the documentation wherein we can understand how the diffing exactly works. But it is efficient enough to take care of not re-rendering the stuff which is not changed and just rendering the minimal bit of DOM that has to be re-rendered. So let's run this example of counter again, and here, as soon as I click the button, it will go and change the state and increment it by 1. This was the second example. Let's create a more interesting example. So what I'm going to now create is a search filter, search box, which can search colors from a list, and on inputting, it will dynamically go and search and then re-render the list. So I'll just call it a search equals to create class, and we have vendors. Okay, so let us return a input field. So I would want to have multiple nodes inside, so I'll to wrap it up into a div. I'll have an input field, and let's say this input field is of type text, and it will have some value. We'll look at that in a bit. So right now I'll put it as an empty string, and if I just go and change this to search, we'll see an input field here. Let me just add some text here, search, and see that we have this DOM ready. Okay, so now what I want to do is, okay, so the curly braces here. So you all might have noticed that I'm using curly braces inside the JSX syntax. So now what this does is, it opens, so whatever you write inside this curly braces is nothing but an expression, and it will be evaluated, and the result of that will be replaced in place. So this is nothing but it will take the value of count, and then it will inline it. If it was 1, it will inline it to 1, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just render a list. I'll need a list. Okay. So what I'll do is colors. Let's define a list here, and that can be red. No personal preferences. Okay, I'll just copy it from whatever I had done earlier. quickly paste it here. Okay, so we have a list of colors. What we'll do is we'll just display a list of it. What we have to do is just colors.map function color, and we'll return a li. Okay, one more interesting thing to note now here is I'm going to render a list of items, and for React to optimize the re-rendering bit whenever things change, we have to pass on something unique to each element that we are iterating over, and that's known as key. So since I don't have anything, what I'll do is I'll just name the color itself as the key, which is unique enough in our case. So if there is no change, it'll look at the diff and it'll do all this optimization and take care of all of it. And let's render the color name here. So now I have this. Let's see if it renders a list. Yes, so we have a list of colors that we had. Now what I want to do is do a search on these colors and display the colors on dynamically. So what I'm going to do is get initial state. These are sweet little syntax that I have. Filtered colors. And this dot colors would be my initial state. Then next would be search key. Key would be an empty string now. And my value here, like I mentioned earlier, it will be the key. So we will have dot key. So sorry, search key. So what this will do is, so now what I want is whenever the key is changed, I want to do something so that it goes and does some search and re-renders the colors here. And here it won't be colors, but it will be filtered colors from state. And yes, okay, so I'll do an on change handler. And on change, I'll pass it a method, say search color. And that will take an event from the input field itself, that's a native event that the DOM itself fires whenever the input field is changed. So I'll quickly create a method. And event now var key is equals to value. So this is the search key that we'll get from the event handler of the input. And next, what I want to do is filter out the colors from the colors here so that we can perform a search. So I'll quickly do this. Filtered color is equals to this dot colors dot filter. And this will take a function. All these methods that are there on collection are available in the latest JavaScript syntax, that is the ES6 version. I'll get a color here, and I'll have to return this dot color dot. So the search is also available in that, and I'll search for search key dot to lowercase, so that we can do, since we know that all our colors are in lowercase, we can just do a search, and we have to check that it is found. So it's not one, and it's found somewhere into the list. So so what this will do is it'll take the color that is that the filter method is iterating over, and then look if it is matching the key that is there using the search function. And if it is matching, the index will be passed, returned from this search method, and that's what it does. So now we have the filtered colors. So now what we want to do is reset the state so that React can go ahead and do the re-rendering part. So set state, and what we have to do is, this dot search key to search key, and filtered colors would be whatever we have, filtered colors. And I think this should give us our intended result. So let's look at the code. Okay, looks like something is forming. Filtered colors. Let me look at them. Filtered colors. Yeah. It is bombing.
Of colors,
Yeah.
Search color line.
Anonymous function. Okay. It's bombing for color. What's wrong? Yeah, so it takes in a function which takes a color.
Returns this dot colors.
return
this dot color.
No, that is correct, right? Like, see, so this.
colors should be on this, right?
No, this dot colors.
So this dot colors, it is doing a filter on that. It will take an anonymous function.
Yeah, why is it this?
Because the colors I've defined here, right? This is the colors that
Should
have
be
been.
colors.
Oh, okay.
This kind of searching in that.
No, that's what it is. So whatever color that I'm passing, right? I'm performing a search on that with the key.
So this is
This. Sorry. Yeah. You're all right. Why am okay. Correct. My bad. And let's see if it works. Yay! Voila, we have it working. So I'll iterate over what we are doing here. So we have the get initial state here. What it does is initialize the filtered colors to this dot colors, which we have defined here up top, and we have the search key as empty string. Since it's the first rendering, we don't have any input, and then we render the React component with the input field, which has a handler on change, and whenever a keystroke is hit in the input field here, this method, the search color, will be called with an event, and the event will have a target value that is used to search in the colors. And what we do is the filtered colors is rendered here. Initially it will be all the colors, but once the on change is triggered, it will do a search in the colors and then set the filtered colors to the result of it, and it will re-render the entire thingy. So whatever we see here is that thing. So this is the basicest of basic in React, wherein you can just directly start writing small teeny components and just yeah.
So wherever you put, can you come now? Wherever you say this on-chain search color, right? So you're not calling it as a function.
So it's a callback.
It's a callback, right?
Yes.
That's because of JSX syntax, which allows you to say that this is the function I'm assigning to on-change.
So this is nothing but a variable that we have defined here, right, and we are assigning it here. And this, like, it's a typical callback thing. You don't invoke the method there. You just pass the handler to the function, and that will be invoked with whatever the callback, like on-change has it.
Or what if you want to pass extra parameters?
So what you'll have to do is you'll have to bind it to that function and create another function out of it. That will scope that binded value into that particular scope, and then that will be triggered.
It should be a function which returns another function.
Correct. So if I were to use underscore library, it would be partial. What this will do is it will take this method. So now the signature of the method search color will have take 2 arguments.
Right.
So say suppose can't think of anything, but say I were to pass this, and I want this to be printed always.
Right.
Okay. So I don't have that here, but so what this will do is, so the name here can be used. So this will create a new anonymous function with the name set predefined,
right,
and it will pass the new e value whenever the on change is being. That will be dynamically passed.
Right. Other option is you can create a function which takes only name, and return another function which takes a
Yes, so that's what partial will do.
That's what partial will do.
Yeah. So that's it. So nothing but if I were to write it in, okay, I'll just write it without using the library, and that will be more clear. So I'm defining a function. Let me look at the screen. So that will take a name, and what this will do is return function which takes e, and the syntax is screwed up. Now I'll call this dot search color with e, and just a second, let me clean this up. This is which part? I just hope I have it right. Return function. This is the return. This is the return. Okay. So what this will take is a function. So I'll have this as test, and I can use that.
Yeah. Got
So something like wait. This
probably the first function.
this is a function. Wait. This is a function, and here you have whatever you want. Var name is equal to whatever you want, and then you can do whatever you want here with that name. That will be bound to that, and then this return, right? I can use console.log name inside this function before or after. That takes a function which will accept a value and do all this stuff.
Yeah.
So there are scenarios where we need to do this, where we need to pass bound values. So when we are dynamically generating content, right, we might want that to be bound to the function and use that inside, and that's where we use this syntax. Okay, yeah. So this was the basics of React, and let me talk about. Let me look at the documentation and talk about what all it does.
Be helpful if you can talk about the life cycle of.
Okay, so React has its own life cycle. It goes through. I'll just quickly open the docs wherein it has all the life cycles and component API, all the methods. Okay, so this is the method set state, which we use to set the state and trigger a re-render. So there is something known as a replace state where you want to replace the existing state with something. So set state will not replace everything. It will just update whatever state you want to. Say, suppose I had 3 states, count 1 and filtered colors, and in set state I'm just setting count and replace filtered colors. The count 2 won't be changed. It will remain intact. It will just do whatever you are passing in. It will set that state. But replace state will replace the entire state to whatever you are passing. So here it is, like the set state, but deletes any pre-existing keys that is there in the next state. And there are, I'll just talk to the most popular component lifecycle methods. So set props. So basically, most of the times it is not preferred to call this set props, because in React, what we treat props as is immutable, and those are the things that comes from the parent, whoever is rendering the component. So in this case here, in the case of a hello world hello component, right, I'm using the props.name, and ideally I would want the caller of the component to pass this value, and I myself will not update this props. That's why we don't use the props. Replace.
In case if you want to like use like override something like that, use something that's default, like we have the default.
So there is set default props also. So in case when you so if you are building a component and you are accepting 2 props, say name and last name, and you say that okay, last name is not mandatory, and you say that okay, I'll default it to empty string. So you will use a lifecycle method known as set default props, which will set default props, and this is a function which will return a hash. Sorry. and this will return something like something similar to get initial state, and you set last name to empty string. So now you know that my parent is not going to pass me last name, and in those cases I'll set it to empty string. So these are the scenarios where when we use set default props, and there are validations. Prop types. So in case, so most of the times you might want to validate the properties that are coming into the component. Say suppose you don't want, in case of count, if we were to take it from the parent, you don't want the parent to send in as it as a string, and you want it to restrict it to number. So what we do is prop types is equals to prop types, and say I'll set this to sorry, prop types dot number, and this is nothing but a hash. So this will set a validations on the prop type count, which says, okay, I'm expecting a number. What this will do is, this will not blow up the code, but in the developer console, like when you're developing, right, it will give a warning saying that it was expecting a number and you have passed in a string or some other type. And so this gives a contract to the other developers wherein you can pass components. The whole point of creating components is reusability, right? So whenever you pass on these components to other developers, they can look at the console and say that, okay, this is what it is expecting. They don't even have to go inside and look at the implementation.
And we can also set the required validation.
Yes, we can also set the is required validation here, wherein if you are expecting something to be there always, you can always say ki, is required, that will validate it, and it will throw up an error. So
prop type serves as a contract for the
yeah, exactly. So that serves as a contract for the user of the component, and we'll have a lot of components which will be reused. So yeah, that's a really very handy thing to have. So that was the prop types. There are other lifecycle methods. Okay, component specs and lifecycle. So as I mentioned, render is a method which every component should have for itself to render and be available in the DOM. Get initial state is something that we have used. So this will set the state before it renders anything, and inside the render method, whatever we are setting in the get initial state will be available. So this is something that we have seen, get default props, and this is the prop types validation. And I'll not go into mixing statics. Okay, display name is something that names your component. So when it is rendered, it'll add a name to it. I'm not so very much critical. Okay, so there are lifecycle methods. So React component itself undergoes a lifecycle. There are component will mount. So what happens is before mounting, like whenever it is being rendered, before it is going to be mounted onto the DOM, this method will be called. So if you have anything to be done before it is mounted, you should be doing it in this method. So how you do here is component will mount, and you do anything. So something like this, you would do this here, and this will be called only once whenever before the component will be mounted. So this is the next method that will be called component did mount. Whenever a component is mounted, whenever it is available in the DOM, this method will be called after the DOM is done. So suppose if you want to make a network call and you want to fetch some data from the server, you might use this lifecycle method, because the component will be mounted and you will have a physical existence of that particular component in the DOM. You can fire up a query which will fetch some data, and on the response of it, you can set the state which will trigger a render and which will update the state of the component. This thing is something which will change. Say, suppose if a parent component rendered a child and it passed in a props, but something changed in the parent and that prop has to be changed, and the parent component changes the props, and that the child should be notified of that the props have changed, do something. So this method will be triggered whenever the parent changes the props of that particular component, and this is the component will receive props. So this is a method. So usually we don't go to this method and do anything. React itself will take care of it. So basically this will check whether the component should update or not. So if you want to say optimize on certain things wherein you don't want the component to be updated on certain state changes or prop changes, you go and override this method and return a boolean false in those cases where you don't want to update the component. This is an optimization hook which we can use in critical cases wherein we don't want the read and read to happen. So suppose we have a timer set and like in 5 seconds, if the state is changing too frequently and we don't want that to happen, we go to this method and stop it, and we just have a mechanism to update this. So this is should component update. Component will update. So this is a callback method which will, once decided that whether it should update or not, it will say, okay, it's going to be updated. Component did update is the after update of the component. Pretty much all of this cycles are straightforward and says what the name says. So component will unmount is, so suppose if you have rendered a component and you want to do some cleanup when the component is going to be removed from the DOM, you use this component and do whatever you want to do here to release some resources, or if you had some state or anything you want to clean it up, you can do it here. And yes, these are the key things which will help us develop good React applications. I think this is what I have for the basics of React, and I hope you guys liked it. So now I think we can check if anyone has any questions. Do we have anyone?
Give it to them.
Stop sharing my screen.
In chat on the
YouTube or Hangout?
YouTube. No, Hangout is requesting for it.
Okay, so I don't have. Let me open.
Can you accept the Hangout request?
This is the one, right? Okay. So I don't have. Let me open.
Can you accept the Hangout request?
This is the one, right? So I don't have. So can I have earphones?
I think we have.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm already done.
So there's one question.
When should I be using React? Okay, so I have a question from Abhishek, and the question is, when should I be using React? So basically, this is a very lightweight UI library, and this solves the, if we take a look at the MVC framework, it solves the problem of view. If we want to develop view components for our application, we can use this library, and it is pretty good and decent at doing its job. So if you want to develop interactive applications and just worry about the view part of it, we can use this framework. Did that answer the question, Abhishek? Okay, so I think that's it, and thank you everyone for watching. Bye-bye. Okay, if anyone has any question, they can post it here and I can take a look at it later and answer to them later. Yeah. Thank you.
Challenge.
My Slack is off. Shall I stop broadcasting?